Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Supporting Dads webinar this evening. We're just going to wait a minute or so before we get started, just to give yourself some time to settle in. Okay. So, welcome to those who have just joined. This is our early years webinar on supporting dads. We've got some great speakers lined up to speak with you today. My name's Abel Fagan. I'm a counselling psychologist by background, and I work in the Anna Freud Centre in the Mind the Dad team and a perinatal mental health team in London. And I've got a specialist interest working with fathers. We have Adrian Burgess, who is from the Fatherhood Institute. She's the joint CEO and head of research, and she's going to be talking about the importance of involving fathers in the early years with a whole agency approach. We have Cliff Joseph from Reach Out Hackney, who's going to be sharing his reflections on young fathers, and Rick, who's a peer support officer from New Family Social, who is going to be offering a LGBT plus adoption and fostering perspective on fostering and adoption potential parents starting their journey. So I wanted to just begin with some of my own thoughts and reflections of working with fathers in the Mind the Dad team. In late 2019, the Mind the Dad service was set up really to bridge the gap and in response to the NHS long-term plan to support dads who were emotionally and psychologically struggling with their new babies. Our project was co-developed and produced with fathers and perinatal teams, and we wanted to make sure that our package of support was accessible and accommodated the real range and varied levels of need. So what we would go about doing is offering quite an in-depth assessment introductory meetings with dads to explore their identity as a father, their family and cultural context, the quality of their relationships with their babies, with their partners, and aiming to be really inclusive of the diversity of dads that are out there, but and at the same time focus on their individual experience. And it kind of came about that our service started at the beginning of the pandemic, and actually I think to have the flexibility of working virtually has been very helpful, making it more accessible to all. I do think that there is something about the view of the relationship between mother and baby which holds privilege, and this consequently places a shadow on the alternate caregiver and undervalues the importance of babies, that babies growing up in context of relationships, not just one relationship or two relationships. It's about the relationships in the family. Cool. There is also the growing research that I wanted to share, that fathers are made and not born. I'm just going to turn on my screen. Hold on one sec. I should have said also at the beginning, and I completely forgot, and I'm sorry, that the seminar is recorded and will be able to view on the Anna Freud Centre YouTube channel in the coming weeks, and we will share the slides after the event. We do have closed captions for this webinar, and if you wanted to turn these on, there's a button on your toolbar. Any questions that you do have, for myself or the speakers, we're going to have some Q&A time at the end of the session today, and this can be found at the bottom of your screen, and you can submit these anonymously if you'd like to do so. And we will try and get through as many of these questions during the panel Q&A at the end. So going back to the research that I mentioned, so this is just one you know, that of many actually, but there's research that shows that parenting experience does transform both women and men's brains and bodies. So there's this Israeli study on gay fathers that I find kind of really fascinating. So the father who took up the role as being the main caregiver, the primary caregiver, that there were changes in their brains, in their responses to their infants, that looked more like mothers than, you know, like an alternate caregiver or a secondary caregiver. And these changes kind of really shaped their responses. So you know, I really think that you know, this shows that we need to kind of be thinking more about developing our policies to support fathers after birth, and to help mold them in to be able to offering the kind of nurturing and attuned care that they have the potential to give. So it has really shed light to me on the, I'm going to stop sharing again, sorry. The extent to which fathers have been marginalized, and that there's a huge gap and need for specialist care and provision. And we've done evaluations in our service, and I think for far the majority, when fathers have been approached as an important and valued equal parent, they're really ready to engage in the process and wanting to claim this space for themselves. It's been so important to validate their experiences of becoming a parent, to hear their voice and support needs, as they are often overlooked and feel invisible. Many dads I've spoken to are caught up in a dilemma of both needing to be a nurturing parent as well as provider, and on top to be a supportive person to their partner. When you combine this with the demanding situation, with dads that have had, you know, really tough life experiences, or a lot of external stresses, when they haven't had the experience of being nurtured themselves, this can really easily tip over into becoming overwhelming. So, you know, I found when fathers are, you know, are self-critical, where they you know, don't feel that good about themselves, or they've got low self-worth, that these really become very intensified when having a new baby, and, you know, kind of sets things up in the family. And there's a lot of research that indicates that poor parental mental health, and how that makes couple relationships, how that makes the co-parenting relationship more strained, and in turn how that impacts on child's development. I wanted to share some of what dads have told us in our evaluation. I'm just going to share my screen again. So in in our context, in our cultural context, I think the emotional neglect that boys experience is often caught up in an expectation that they shouldn't show vulnerability. This can set up future mental health difficulties and struggles with parenting. I see dads who believe that there isn't anyone that could hear or tolerate their distress, feeling like they should be coping alone without turning to others. And when this is matched by patchy levels of support and lack of specialist services out there, it kind of sets things up so I'm going to really feel quite alone and isolated. I've found that offering a compassionate and understanding relationship is so important to help. To give them persistent encouragement that kind of relationship is available to them, because this challenges the status quo and their experiences to date. I think I've really helped dads to help develop their identity as a dad when they don't have these nurturing role models to draw on, and help them to make sense of what it means in their context, and hopefully kind of disrupt some of the transgenerational patterns that are being repeated. So just to kind of share with you some of what dads have said. So, right. I was born and raised in a country where, in a context where men are men and they don't talk about their feelings and emotions, because if they do, they're regarded as being weak, sissies, not very strong in character, not real men. Had to be strong in the beginning, so didn't allow myself to have any emotion, kept on telling myself I didn't have a problem and it was her. Hadn't realized it was affecting me so much, keeping it all in. I feel that there's no space for me to have problems, as her problems have been so severe, both long-term physical problems and pain, and her PTSD. I feel like my views are shut down. I feel like I cannot communicate my side of things. I put my feelings aside on some situations to understand my partner's difficulties. I do have my own pressures, for example, work. I try to do my best to both sides. It's hard expressing these feelings. Those thoughts can build up into frustration. I do not have any coping mechanisms. I felt like a metaphorical punch bag with my partner's difficulties. I may not ask her for help when she is getting the time for herself. Because obviously, usually when you're in that situation, when you're struggling with whatever, you want to discuss it with your partner. But when part of the reason is because of them, you don't want to discuss it because you don't want to make them feel worse. I think that having an opportunity to voice those feelings and struggles when dads have been sidelined has offered them an experience to be understood and informed how interventions are put in place to give them the help that they need and foster better family and peer relations. So in the Anna Freud Centre and the Mind and Dad team, we've offered fathers a choice. It's been very helpful both for them to have individual support for those that are more vulnerable in complex situations, but also in a group context too. We offer a psychoeducational group where they have an opportunity to share their experiences, meet other dads, and have their experiences normalized. We really couldn't have done this without the external funding from the Berry Street Foundation, and we would like to thank them for their continued support in the project. It's been so rewarding working in the team and hearing from the fathers how helpful it's been for them. So I'm sure I can speak for them and also from them say a big thank you too. So we're going to turn to Adrian now, please, who's from the Fatherhood Institute, to share with you her presentation.
Ah, lovely. Here we are. Right. Can we just, so let me stay on this slide just for a second to say that, yes, what I want to talk about is a whole agency or a whole service approach to engaging and supporting fathers, because we think that's the only way in which it works well. So here we go. The next slide, please. A very quick word about the Fatherhood Institute. You all know we've got a website. You can read about us. Just to say that we start off, everything we do is grounded in the research. And so we have an ongoing program funded by the Nuffield Foundation where we write up, look at particular topics. So currently I'm doing one on fathers in the first year after the birth, in which we scope the research and then we explore the findings and write recommendations. Policy we do a lot of, and of course that can be paternity leave, on that sort of level with government, but also when the children's centres were around, we were very influential on getting fathers seen as core business. What we wrote, we helped to write the policy that would make sure that the children's centres engaged fathers, and lots of them did so really well. And we hope that will still be the case with the new family hubs. Main work, of course, is practice. We write practice guides, lots of them for free on our website, and we run all kinds of trainings and also some parenting courses, which I'll talk about briefly later. Next slide, please. So, first of all, there are a lot of myths around fatherhood. And I want to just address something by asking you, I'd run a poll, because polls are fun, but it would take up too many minutes. So what I'm going to do is ask you a question. So this is for you to be actively engaged. And I'm going to give you alternatives to the answer. And I want you to choose one in your head, one that you think is right. And then I'll talk about what the right one actually is. So first, next slide, please. So next, just open the next thing, fly in, just push that. What percentage of parents, this is the question, what percentage of couples, male and female couples, are in a couple relationship at the time of the birth? What percentage of parents, mothers and fathers in this case, are in a couple relationship at the time of the birth? Okay, next fly in, please. Right, you've got a choice of 4. The percentage who are in a couple relationship at the time of the birth. Is it 73%? Is it 87%? Is it 95%? Or is it 68%? Right, can you choose one of those that you think is right? Okay, the answer is 95%. 95% either are married or living together, or are planning living separately but consider themselves a couple or close friends and are planning to raise the child together. Okay, next slide, please. Another question. Yes, could you fly it in? What percentage of parents jointly register their baby's birth? Jointly, that means that both the father's name and the mum's will be on the birth certificate. Fly it in, please. Is it 89%? Is it 73%? Is it 95%? Is it 68%? Hope you've been able to choose one of those. Okay, so the answer is 95% again. So I think what we see here is that at the time of the birth, there really are hardly any single mums. So can we go on to the next slide, please? I would add to that, let's fly that in. There's very little family breakdown in the first couple of years. Here's a sample, and this is a sample of 5,717 families in disadvantaged households, because in some of the most disadvantaged areas of the UK, with a child under 18 months. This was a survey carried out in children's centres in highly disadvantaged areas. Huge sample that, 5,717. Now, of those, 1,086 dads were not living with their young children full time, right? They were visiting fathers, or they were living in their own household. So out of these 1,086 fathers, 250 of them had no face-to-face contact with their child. Next bit, please. Which means that out of the whole sample of 5,717 dads, just 250 were not living with or in regular contact with their young child. So that's that just shows how few fathers there are. So when a service says to us, oh, in our environment, it's almost all single mums here, they say, we haven't hardly any fathers in the vicinity. It's just not the case. Remember that this sample was of children's centres in highly disadvantaged areas. So getting rid of some of these myths are really crucial to motivate people to understand why they need to engage with dads. If you think if your belief is that there aren't any dads in the district, well, why are you going to try to engage with them? So let's move on to the next slide. So why support dads? One of the reasons would be because they're already here. We know they're all in the families. They're all either in the household or closely attached to it. So you're going to get this PowerPoint at the end. So I'm going to just spin through the next few slides, but they give you the nuts and bolts of why it's important to support dads. So could we have the next slide? Firstly, it's because how they impact children. Now, they impact children for good and for bad, as do mothers, of course. And this is just a slide that shows what happens when fathers are highly involved with their young children. What are the longer term outcomes? And they're really, really positive. That's one very good reason to try to get dads involved, because the more involved they are, the better their children tend to do. Abel said very wisely in his introduction that it's about the web of family relationships. It is true. Fathers are these important players in the whole web. So the dyadic relationship with the child is just one of the factors. Let's have a look at the next slide. Fathers affect mothers. That's the other reason. Mothers affect fathers. Fathers affect mothers. The father-child relationship affects the mother-child relationship. It's all in there. So you can have a look at some of these. Here are some fathers. Fathers can affect mothers very badly, of course. But if you are working with a dad, here's an interesting one, just the first one here. Breastfeeding rates are higher when fathers are knowledgeable and supportive. And when fathers are helped to be knowledgeable, they're more likely to be supportive. I'm not going to go through all these. You can look at these. I love the second one, though. They've asked new mothers, who's your most important support person in your life? And 80% of them say it's their baby's father. So that's higher than any other person, their own mum or friends. We do a lot of stuff around peer-to-peer. Oh, let's get mothers supported by other mothers. Well, that's fine. But actually, their main support person is their baby's father. He is the one we should be looking to equip to support her. Next slide, please. Also, involved fatherhood supports gender equality, and uninvolved fatherhood sabotages it. So could you just give me the next bit, please, and the next one? These are bullet points you can look at, which show when a father's highly involved, how the mother does in terms of her role in the public world. There are lots of these. I just chose two, and I'm sure you'll enjoy reading them later. Okay, next slide, please. Because involved fatherhood transforms men. Now, Abel, I was glad to see that Abel, you can just put all those up now, all the bullet points on this slide. Abel pointed to the fact that there were neurological change and neuroplasticity in the brain, when fathers were primary carers. Actually, it's not just fathers who are primary carers, all fathers who are, a man who is living with a pregnant woman, his testosterone drops in the last 6 weeks before the birth. He doesn't have to be involved. He's not involved. Baby's not even born. He doesn't even have to be the father of the child. But if he's living with a pregnant woman, this is nature's way of building his commitment and sensitivity to the coming child. So you can look at some of this hormonal stuff. It's 20 years of research now, and it shows that the active fatherhood with lots of involvement, makes the greatest changes and prepares men. This is also happens with adoptive mothers. I mean, they don't get the rushes of hormones that that pregnant and breastfeeding women do, but they learn to be fathers. So fathers and mothers really are made, or can be made, not born, as Abel said, and that's really powerful. It's up to us to make these men and these moms, to help make them the best parents they can be. And one of the ways you do with that with dads, of course, is that you promote their involvement, you give them the skills, you tell them they're important, you make sure they get to hold their baby skin to skin. So many things you can do, so simple, you know, that health visitors can do, that midwives can do, that workers in early years can talk to the dads about it. Just tell them this stuff is so vital and so important, and they love it. They love to know that their bodies change so that they become really sensitive dads. Next slide, please. This is in your own interest. I think I have 3 bullet points here, and you can fly them all in and you can all read them later. Service provision is more effective when fathers are included. You give a better service when you include the father. I mean, not only do you avoid the risk of a father sabotaging a service and sabotaging what you're doing with mum, but, you know, it's more effective. And I'll just read the first one because you can read them all later. Delivering an intervention to both parents is significantly more effective than delivering it to just one. It's quite straightforward. You don't have to have them in the same room at the same time, actually. You know, if you're running a rolling course, the mother can attend one and the father can attend a subsequent one, or the first one, without her, with the other parent at home looking after the baby. So you don't just go, oh, we're doing an intervention and which parent can come? We say, how are we going to get them both there? They've got childcare issues and so on. So delivering an intervention to both parents is significantly more effective than delivering it to just one, and that makes intuitive sense for all of us, I'm sure. Next slide, please. So that's the why. Those are the realizations of why. Why, in fact, once I really understood this, I couldn't understand how a service couldn't seek to support fathers, because it's perfectly plain that if they don't, they're delivering a very second-rate service to mothers and children. So the why is important. So how? If you show us the next slide, please, now this will take a moment for you to take this in, I think. Babies, loads of beer bottles, right. So this is what you get, isn't it, when men look after babies? This is the kind of thing we sort of hold, lots of us, me too, I'm not immune to this, the cultural stereotypes, which are sort of negative underpinning beliefs that unconsciously deter us from engaging with dads. And in our trainings, we really look at this, because you have to know what's going on in your own mind. You have to know what your subconscious and subconscious and unconscious processes are. So let's just look at a couple of these. Next slide, please. So the first one is fathers are not as equipped as mothers by nature to care effectively for children. If you have that belief, why would you bother to pull him in, you know? Men are unable or unwilling to change. That's a very common one that we don't necessarily have these in our conscious mind at all. But when we do a little bit of work, some processes, we can see which ones of them ring a bell with us. So next slide, please. I said at the start, yes, lovely, put them all up. Agency systems have to support dads. When we started off 20 years ago, the Fatherhood Institute, we used to run these open courses, and the service would send along a father worker, often a man, sometimes a woman, quite often not very high up in the hierarchy, not very well paid often, and they would send them to get the skills to engage with dads. Some of them already had good skills, actually. And then the father workers would go back to the agency. They would have no power. Everybody would dump everything on them. So they'd be trying to sort out the men's mental health, their housing, and they'd fob the fathers off. I remember being in a children's centre and a dad brought his child in. And the woman at the front desk said, "Oh, lovely to see you. We have a dad's group on Saturday." And she gave him a leaflet about it. In fact, there was a stay and play happening at that moment, and she did not invite him in. So one of the things that can happen is that the fathers are fobbed off onto a group, onto a worker. And there are many things that the agency has to do to make sure that fathers are supported. And again, you can read this afterwards, and we cover this extensively in most of our guides, in most of our, and of course in our training. Next one, please. Next slide, please. Fine. Now, the next thing is worker competencies. I think over the years, one of the most fascinating things that we found is that, of course, some workers have absolutely brilliant competencies, right? And some people that you would be surprised, but you can get a male worker who has very negative beliefs about men and fathers, who's carrying that stuff in there. So that even though he's a man, it doesn't mean he's necessarily going to work well with these men, because he's not validating them in a good way. He regards them with suspicion. And of course, male workers are more likely to feel positively about fathers and men than female workers are overall. But there's huge variation. And some female workers, of course, are just naturally very positive towards men. I had one woman in a training once who worked in the territorial army at weekends, and she worked in a children's centre in the week, and she didn't like men. She thought she was completely brilliant. She had all the skills. So very often when you're looking at the competencies, you have to work out what they need, but most of the workers just need to be aware that they already have them.
Adrian,
Okay.
sorry to interrupt you. You've just got a minute or so left.
Yeah, that's great. On to the next slide, please. This is just to introduce you to what you can see on our website, which is what our workforce training looks like. So that these are just courses we run. We also do bespoke ones. And interestingly, we'll do them as seminars, or we'll do them as up to a 3-day training, where in between days 2 and 3, the person on the course goes back to the service and implements a small change, which may make all the difference. And final slide. This is just 3 of the parenting courses that we train people to run locally on the train the trainer model. Becoming Dad, which is particularly focuses on father's mental health in the transition, and mother's mental health as well. Family Foundations, which is a couple-based program, is absolutely brilliant. We've run it in lots of local authorities, wonderfully in Brighton. Everyone who runs it loves it. And then we do Fathers in Schools, or Nurseries and Schools, which is Fathers Reading Every Day. So thank you very much for listening. It's been great to be here.
Well, thank you, Adrian, for your very passionate presentation there, bringing together a range of research on why we should be supporting fathers more. So we are going to turn now to Cliff, who's going to talk about his experiences of working with young fathers. Cliff, over to you.
So I just wanted to say thank you for having me here on this panel today. It's a real honor. I wanted to speak a little bit about my experience as a father and as somebody who's worked with fathers, particularly young fathers. But whatever I say in relation to young fathers, I think applies to all fathers. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience from being a young father initially. I had 2 young daughters, and myself and my wife separated, and I found myself in the position of being the main carer for my 2 daughters, which was a little bit unexpected at the time, but also a challenge which I took on board and did the best that I could do, doing school runs and having to work myself full time. And generally sort of caring for them and doing after school activities, etc. It was a lot to take on, but something that many parents whether they do so as two parents or a one-parent household are able to do. But it gave me an insight into an aspect which I hadn't really thought about that much before finding myself in that position. And that was looking at the support that was available for young fathers compared to the mothers that I saw around me. And I think that's one of the things that attracted me a few years later into becoming a young father's development worker, because through my experiences, that really inspired me to want to promote the opportunities that were available, and where there were barriers, to highlight those barriers and see what could be done to overcome them. One of the things that I did notice, and it almost seems the flip side to what many people may consider the norm, is that although I had the main day-to-day responsibility for the upbringing of my daughters, my wife was also in the background, and they would stay with her occasionally at weekends, etc. So it wasn't that she was totally absent, it's just that a lot of the day-to-day responsibility for raising my children fell on my shoulders, I felt. Following on from Adrian is quite a daunting task, because she's such an expert in this field and has covered some really, really important points on this subject. So I won't go over those again, but I'll try and shed some light on some areas which you may want to think about. There'll also be some questions which I will pose for you to place your comments on in the chat. So be ready for those as they come up. So I've come across a statistic recently, which is that 80% of men become fathers. But interestingly, as practitioners, we know very little about this 80% of men. And that sparked in me a question about why that is. What is it that we're not seeing of importance there? An assumption I think that we all make is that men go to work, earn money, and instill discipline. But besides that, we know very little about what this 80% are doing and their functions within the families that we work with. Another interesting statistic, and there won't be many of these today that I'll be throwing at you, is that only 5% of mammals have fathers that invest in their children. And of apes, we're the only ones that do. The question is, why? I can't say that I know the answer, but for some reason, the input of fathers into the survival and development of their children is something that we place immense value on. I would suggest that this is the case because of deep attachments that are formed between fathers and their families. It is true that some fathers are absent, but in my experience, most are not. When I was initially working with fathers, there were issues of benefits, housing, etc., and needing there to be no official record of their presence or involvement with their children or their families. But that didn't mean that they weren't present in some way, shape, or form. Fathers' roles continue to develop to fit in with the circumstances that they find themselves in. Mothers come home from hospital much earlier now than they would have done 20 or 30 years ago. Quite commonly now, 24 hours after birth, mothers are sent home, whereas, 20, 30, 40 or plus years ago, that would have been a much longer period of perhaps 4 to 5 days or even a week or longer. There's also the breakdown of extended families and how much more important and responsible parents have to be, and that includes fathers as well as mothers. And also more families relying on dual incomes, where mothers have to go out to work and fathers have to take on more of the responsibility of rearing their children when the mothers are not at home. But fathers quite often feel locked out and alienated from many formal settings where they should be encouraged and welcomed. For example, prenatal appointments or statutory entitlements like paternity leave. I was researching some stats for paternity leave, and in Finland, 90% of men take up paternity leave, which is a similar figure in this country actually. But the paternity leave entitlement in Finland is that much more generous than it is in the UK, that there's a more defined benefit to the fathers taking advantage of paternity benefit in Finland than there is in this country. It was interesting when I was working with fathers that although statistically or according to official records, they were less present, when we changed track and started thinking about how to incentivize their involvement in the programs that we were running, they seemed to be coming out of the woodwork from all directions. So it wasn't that they weren't there, it's just that the incentives for them to be involved was not there. So this takes us to the first question that I'm going to pose to you. How does your organization incentivize fathers to become and stay involved in the work that you do? And this is just one for you to think about for the moment. As a practitioner, my experience tells me that fathers want to be involved and that they just need the means to do it. So why are services geared up to engage in with only the one parent, usually the mother, and not the father too? Is it because it's easier to do that? Is it because we're lazy? Is it cultural? What are your thoughts? Especially in an age where more and more fathers are responsible for being the head of the household, where there isn't a mother present in the traditional sense, because we need to be thinking more and more about how to engage these fathers. So I'm going to ask you to think about the top 3 ways in which your organization involves fathers. And I'll just give you a minute to do that. You can write it down or type it, whichever you find easier. So one of the questions to consider is, as practitioners, what are we doing to engage fathers in the work we do? This can range from issues of consent to focus groups. So what is it you as a practitioner are doing to engage fathers in the work that you do? And I'm raising this point because we need to change the conversations we're having about and with fathers if we truly want to be inclusive. We need to create and maintain an inclusive environment which not only aims to engage fathers at certain points in the work we do, for example, initial consent, but throughout the whole process. Some fathers are absent, yes, but so too are some mothers, so this should not be a barrier. Social workers often report that they have not included fathers in the work they do, for example, life story work. One of the boroughs which I've worked quite closely with over the last few years is Islington, in which they've made lots of improvements in the way they ask for fathers' details as part of the screening process. According to the OECD, 2/3 of children in the UK live with both parents, that's fathers and mothers. And that's something we really need to bear in mind. An interesting question, though, is what is a father? Because this whole presentation pivots on fatherhood and fathers. What actually is a father? I know it might sound quite straightforward. Adrian will probably be jumping up and down right now because I'm going to read something from the Fatherhood Institute. It's called Where's Daddy? And it was funded by the Nuffield Foundation, which recommends that today's diversity of fathering should be captured. So, for example, first, fathers such as birth or adoptive or stepfathers should be differentiated. Often these are lumped together. Second, it recommends that separated fathers should be reclassified in terms of whether and how much of the time they live with their children. Full-time, co-resident, or part-time co-resident or non-resident. Currently, these fathers are typically classed as non-resident or even as childless. In fact, they often spend a great deal of time, even as much as the mother quite often, with their children, and are very important to them and to their long-term outcomes. So another question I'm going to pose to you is, how does your organization define a father? And what does that definition capture or not? Another thing that we need to be thinking of as practitioners is how we record what has worked well when trying to engage fathers and what has not worked well, so that we can then develop our own practice individually and as an organization based on that information. We need to consider why fathers are not in attendance and what attempts have been made to gain their views. An area which I've done some work on is serious case reviews. And I find it interesting that quite often they say that it's very risky to not assess the work with men who have an important role in children's lives. Not just biological fathers, but also any men in a parenting role for children. If this is pointed out in serious case reviews, it's something that we should also be taken on board and thinking about how we want to work with this in our practice. Before finishing up, I want to turn to the importance of a father in a child's life. Various studies have shown that children with involved dads are likely to be more confident, emotionally secure, and form better social bonds. Their educational outcomes are often better than children with dads who are less involved. And also they are more likely to have better communication skills and better intellectual functioning. The importance of a father in child's development is undeniable. As children are able to learn to better regulate their behavior during the playful and stimulating activities a father is likely to provide. My work with young people often focuses on developing confidence, communication skills, and resilience. And if these have already been pointed out as factors which fathers' roles can help to increase, again, it's another reason for us to think about the role of fathers in the work that we're doing. Finally, I'd like to think about what the role of a father is in child development. So that could be the role of a protector, an educator, a role model, and a friend. As a father, you're key in determining how your children think and relate to men both now and in the future. You are the role model. And if you're working with fathers, those fathers are the role models for their children. So when we're thinking about how, the questions that we might want to raise in relation to the presentations you've heard today, it would also be interesting to hear about the things that have surprised you throughout this process. So I'd like to end there, if that's okay, Abel. I know it's a couple of minutes early.
No problem. Thank you very much, Cliff. And yeah, you're asking some really important questions about, I guess, why fathers have been ignored, or how they are being hidden, what acknowledging the barriers that there are kind of implicit and not spoken about, and I guess how we can take much more of an active role about responding and addressing this, both men themselves and for those that work with men and fathers.
Thank you.
So over to Rick now. Are you with us, Rick?
I am indeed.
Great.
I am.
Hi. So Rick's from New Family Social. Over to you. Thank you very much for joining us today.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. As Abel said, my name's Rick and I work for New Family Social. I am the peer support officer for the organisation, and my role is I help people through the process of adoption or fostering. And there's different levels of that. So we go through different tiers. So we go tier 1, tier 2 and tier 3. Tier 1 is more of a kind of how you doing sort of thing. Tier 2 is more in depth when the person needs to offload or doesn't really understand their journey as well through the adoption or fostering process. And the third one is when someone is actually crying for help and need that support. And I think a lot of the questions that come forward to us is identity. A lot of people lose their identity going through the adoption and fostering process. So when I was going through the adoption fostering process, when I was going through the adoption process with my 3 boys, I didn't have anyone that looked like me. I had friends who had children, but I was the only sort of gay man with children, and I didn't have that sort of support network around me. And it was really difficult to sort of transition through this new life that I had started to build for myself. And yes, I had my family and some support network, but I struggled to understand and to adapt to everything that was happening. Social services were a great help, but I was still missing that really important ingredient, and that was an identity, someone to look to and think, actually, I'm not on my own in this. So part of my role is that I speak to a lot of members who struggle with that sort of identity and struggle with trying to understand their route through the adoption and fostering process. I find it really interesting, and there's a lot of people out there who are struggling, and I speak to a lot more men going through the process than I do any other orientation. So yeah, I speak to men mainly about their struggles, and once having children, they're able to adapt into this different life, which sometimes can cause financial pressures, relationship pressures, and just trying to talk them through all of those different emotions that are happening. And sometimes that could take hours for you to really understand their side of the story, and to really kind of feel for them and where they are. I think what it is mainly as well is that some people struggle with adapting to society, because as a gay man, you feel like you're constantly coming out. You're meeting people for the first time. A lot of people assume that you are with a woman because you've got young children, and that is there, and that's just it. And so you're constantly having to bring up the fact that the children are adopted and you are a gay man, and there isn't any sort of woman present, really. So it makes you feel less of a person, really, because a lot of the times that have come out to me, people say, well, they need their mother, or the child, say, for instance, my son was crying once on the bus, and a lady shouted out to me saying, you just need to take him home to his mother. Well, I don't understand why I should. As a father, I'm just as capable of providing for my child's needs. And I think this perception of women should have that role, that job of looking after the child, where actually I wasn't any good because my child was distressed because his dummy had dropped out of the buggy, or whatever situation we're in, it is always faced with, well, that child would be a lot happier if that if that child was being cared for or nurtured by a woman. And it does baffle me, and it still baffles me to this day, that people have still got that perception of that child needs that mother. I was recently at a party recently, and someone who didn't know me had met my boys for the first time, and I needed to give my eldest some medicine to help with a sore throat that he had, and he was crying. And once again, someone unbeknown to us came over and was like, "Oh, it's okay. Is that how mommy gives it you?" And once again, it makes you feel like you're not good enough. You're not good enough to parent them, because it should always be that, you know, the mother should be the one that should take control. And I see it with a lot of heterosexual couples, as well as a lot of couples that we deal with, that they have this at school gates, at parties, and when school shows are on, and those sort of things. Everyone's expecting a mother to walk through as well as us. I've had times where people have thought that me and my husband are brothers, or the children are cousins, even though we've got 3 boys, because they're kind of waiting for this sort of, oh, and it's that sort of, no, they're adopted, we're together. And it's like, right, how does that work? Right, who plays the mother? And that's another question that comes up. Who plays the mother in this? And it's kind of like, well, no one plays the mother. You know, we are 2 loving parents, and I'm sure we know fully well how to look after a child. You know, there's no book out there. You know, you can read as many books as you want, but you do learn on the job when it comes to parenting. But you are faced with that all the time as a gay man, as well as constantly coming out. And I think we're used to that as, you know, as a gay man, you're used to that sort of someone saying, oh, you're gay, oh, you've got children. And they're trying to figure it out, but at the same time insulting you. But all you're trying to do basically is not be rude about it, and try and educate them a little bit, and saying, well, you know, and they go, oh, why? How was the boys adopting you? And you're kind of going to another level that you feel like, oh, you're up against a wall here. And it does make you feel that way. And a lot of our members are going through that as well. We deal with about 5,500 members in New Family Social. A majority of them are gay men going through the adoption or fostering process. And a number of times, a lot of people have come to me and said, how do I overcome this? My son wasn't allowed to go to a birthday party because they wanted a mother to be there instead, but we're 2 men, you know? It's those sort of things that we have to try and really understand and really kind of help our members through that next level of trying to understand that in some way we'll always be pointed at, we'll always be looked at differently. The world is changing, and it's changing nicely and very, very slowly. We are accepted in loads of places, but there is still a lot of hate towards us. There's still a lot of kind of, men can't do that, especially gay men can't do that. How can they raise a child? How can a man raise a child without a woman being around? So, you know, we have to really kind of hold our teeth with that, hold our grit with that, because that is the things that come across all the time. And it's the same when we deal with our social workers. So we train around about 1,000 social workers, and we deal with that many social workers all over the UK. And we help people understand different relationships that might be about people who are a single adopter or single foster carer, people who are, of course, a couple going through the adoption or fostering process, people from all different orientations that we deal with as well through the LGBT plus umbrella. So we try and educate the best we can and help our people through training. And we do our podcasts. So we get people from all walks of life and try to give their versions of their stories that they have faced. And it's so great to hear that I've got my own personal story and how I deal with my sort of day-to-day run-ins with my 3 boys, and the struggles that I might face every now and again when in supermarkets or schools, or meeting people for the first time. So we try and help them through it as well. And sometimes it isn't as easy. A lot of some of our members feel rejection from the community that they're in. And sometimes that can be from their own community, from the LGBT community, that they might feel rejection because a lot of people don't understand why we've got children or why we want to parent. And I've always kind of thought that I've always wanted to be a father, and you know, we're so lucky now that we can adopt and we can foster, and there's no sort of like, no, you can't do that. So it's kind of trying to once again re-educate, and to make our members understand that they aren't alone in these troubled times that they're going through. And a lot of people will struggle with their support network. They will struggle with their families because one, they've come out as gay or lesbian. So sometimes their support network or their families struggle with that. Bring children into the mix, it's a whole different ball game. So sometimes we help our adopters or foster families and their families. We try and help them through the resources that we've got through the organisation. And I'm immensely proud to work for the organisation that I work for. And I absolutely love my job. I try and help from my own personal experiences how try and help them see that actually there is a light at the end of the tunnel. We will face these challenges, but as long as they know that they've got a support network with us, it just makes me immensely proud. And it's a great charity to work for and a great organisation. We do loads of events. We do Let's Talk events. We do expert webinars, whether that's on benefits, whether that's on support network. We do things around playtime, so children kind of being allowed to express who their family is, so different family makeups. So we do a lot of work with children, with our members as well, getting everybody on the same page. And sometimes we work with schools because it might be the first time a school has had a first gay family walking in with adopted children. My boys' school, we are the first, and it's a very religious school, and we thought we would be up against a wall here, but we were lucky. We were very, very lucky that we wasn't. The school was very, very open. There was one situation that happened, and that was about Mother's Day. And at first, my boys were excluded from that event because they didn't want to upset the children, but without asking us first whether that was okay. So they did that off their own back by excluding my boys from that event because they didn't feel that the boys had anyone to write to, but that isn't the case. Their mother isn't a secret. They know they're adopted. But once again, it comes to this, like, we're not important enough, or their mother should be the one that should be celebrated. So we had to really kind of own in on that and really have meetings with the school for them to really understand, actually, it isn't all about their mother. You know, they're being raised by 2 men who love them very, very dearly. And we need to get over this fact that it should be a mother, that should be the one that they should be celebrating. So yeah, there's loads of work that goes into the New Family Social. Once again, like I said, I'm very, very proud to work with the members we do and the organisation we do. I believe that we're doing some incredible work with some members. So I'm just really, really glad to be part of this experience this evening and for you to have us. So thank you so much. Thanks, Abel.
Thank you very much. So yeah, just the thoughts that I was having, how valuable, I guess, your role is to provide that listening ear to fathers making the transition to being a parent, and I guess the hidden struggles that might be there, the judgments and prejudices that they may face. And yeah, I guess really undervaluing the the importance, their role, their motivations for wanting to be a dad.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So thank you. So we've got a bit more time for questions. So let's go over, if we can go over to the Q&A now. If all the panel members could come back on. Just give me 1 second. So I think there's I guess some questions sort of near the beginning around the lack of services targeted for men, and why there needs to be, you know, additional funding for that. You know, why isn't it just a kind of a routine thing, knowing what we do know about the importance of fathers and the support that they need. And I just wondered what the panel's experiences were of that. Is the questions around the lack of services available.
Want me to answer that?
Yeah, just as everyone.
Okay, so I think that there have been services around the Children's Centre network originally, quite a lot of fathers workers, quite a lot of separate services. The thing is that these are add-on services. So apart from the underpinning beliefs that fathers aren't really important, which are beliefs held by funders, most of the staff, all kinds of people, government people, you know, part of those things make them quite sort of unlikely to be funded. But the other issue is that really they're all, as add-on services, they will always be cut, you know, because what has to happen is what I talked about, and which everybody in the US, for example, knows because they've been doing it so much. They started with loads of add-on services. And now what they really strongly work on is father inclusive practice. So that fatherhood is everybody's business, and everybody is trained and to work with these men. Quite often at the moment, I feel really sad because the father's only service is the only one where fathers get any recognition. Like the guys who've been on this panel, you know, such great work today, are having to hold that whole thing. So I do think that until there is father inclusive practice and agencies bid for funding to engage with fathers as part of their mainstream work, there won't be services.
So I think what you're saying, Adrian, is very much a kind of a mentality of I guess, you know, rather than there being, you know, a separate service or something targeted, that it's about, you know, working with the family, the system around the child, who are the people caring for this child that they need the help, to think about it holistically.
Yes, that's right. So mostly they are the biological fathers, because most children actually grow up with their biological fathers, either living with them or with them living separately but involved in their lives. And the good thing also then is to also, as one of the guys, forget which one, said rightly, about keeping the eye on the social fathers as well, all the different kinds of fathers that are available to children that are contributing. Indeed, it's 90% of men have never played an active, by the time they're 70, have not played an active role in the life of a child. 90% have played. I mean, only 10% of men have not played. So there's such a resource. And it's really interesting. We had trouble with the children's centres too. They would classify fathers as this kind of add-on group. You know, they'll make a list of all our services. We've got all these people we've got to meet, and they put them alongside travellers, you know, or refugee fathers, you know, these specific groups who need particular cultural approaches or whatever. Whereas fathers are not an add-on. They're virtually 50% of all the parents in the room, not just biologically. And so if you start talking about fathers as an add-on group, you're doomed to failure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cliff, Rick, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, that was so eloquently put, Adrian. Thank you very much. I think I was one of the things I always try and do when I consider these type of questions is to follow the money in a sense, because as a practitioner, quite often what you do is you get funded to do work. So the question is, who is doing the funding, and what is it they're trying to do through that funding? So if we accept, as Adrian said, that 50% of parenting is fathering, if we just keep it very simple in those terms, but that's not reflected necessarily in the funding or the work which is being carried out. Why is that so? Is a question, I suppose, that's raised. And as practitioners, what are we doing about it? Because it's one thing to say that you take the funding because it's to do a certain type of work, but then I think as you do that work, you also have to feedback on what that work is not covering. And I think Adrian quite rightly says that this shouldn't be an add-on piece of work, working with fathers. It is the work. It's 50% of the work. It's not an add-on. And we need to be reporting that back to our funders and those who commission the work that we do. It's not an add-on, it is the work.
Right.
I wonder also, alongside the following the money and how services are organized, is there something also about the workforce that is employed? We've covered a bit today about the potential kind of internal kind of barriers or views that we might hold that could exclude fathers, but I guess there's also within childcare, within caring professions, that often the practitioners are women. What do you think? Does this make a difference? Yeah, just as a question.
I would say I would be remiss if I didn't say that it does make a difference. Again, going back to sort of thinking about it as a practitioner, it's one thing to say it does make a difference. It's another thing to say, what is that difference? So I think that if the work that we're doing is being commissioned to be done in that type of way, as practitioners, as I was saying, we need to then challenge that. But if practitioners are not challenging that, why is that so? So what narrative does the commissioned work seek to promote? And if we're not challenging that, what narrative are we seeking to perpetuate? Mm-hmm. And those are questions that we need to ask ourselves.
We done a program of work called Mighty, MITEY, which is men in the early years. Yes. And picking up on this whole idea of the workforce, yes, it makes a huge difference when the workforce is all female. And the government tried to have various targets and never met them. I think it's still about 2% of the early years workforce of men. It's higher, I think, in Norway, one of the countries. I always forget which Scandinavian country, but that had a drive on it. I think it got it up to about 18%, which was really quite good. Nursing has been quite successful in getting a lot more male nurses in. It isn't impossible. With men in the early years, it is tricky. The cultural disincentives are huge. Of course, the guys who do it often absolutely love it. But we did a piece of work trying to get guys working with guys in Tower Hamlets, trying to get the further education colleges to attract young men onto their childcare courses, right? And what was really interesting was the childcare courses were a real turn-off. If you got on them, and you were a man, you would be completely feeling you were like nobody. There'd be nothing in there about gender. And so it was tricky. And we just have seen the barriers on every level. We keep plugging away. And I do think, it would be hugely beneficial at the moment if a child walks into a nursery, even if they've got a highly involved dad at home, if they go into a nursery and all the people looking after children are women, then of course they think it's a woman's job, So we think it does need to be tackled systematically again, with good funding. We have never successfully, we've run 3 or 4 projects and never successfully increased the number of men in whatever service it was in the early years. But my God, we've learned a lot about what to do and what not to do. And quite often when we're partnered with somebody and we're trying to do it, they will not do what the research tells them, and we try to tell them that they should do. Because that's the way of the world, And we hope by plugging away, we can get somewhere.
I think that also touches on a wider aspect, because I think gender is just one aspect of that, but there are also other aspects. So, for example, about diversity within the male workforce that work with young people. And if you look at the diversity within that would be an even lower percentage. So I think it's a much wider conversation, and one which is really important to have and to address, about creating about it. If you want to be inclusive, actually really being inclusive in the work that you're doing, and that's a much wider cultural conversation.
Completely.
So thank you. So there's another couple of questions that are around fathers who find themselves in a situation where they might be kind of taking up a lot of the care of the babies, of their children, perhaps kind of in difficult or unfortunate circumstances. For example, partners who end up in a mother and baby mental health unit, or I guess any sort of kind of other sudden situations where fathers kind of unexpectedly are faced with taking up the kind of main parenting role. I guess I wondered whether that's quite a unique situation, really, for a parent, for a dad to be in, because I guess it's maybe something kind of more unique to being a father, kind of being thrown in this position of having to take up the care. Well, I guess what your thoughts were about the kind of specialist support that dads might need at that time. And I know Cliff, you kind of mentioned your own experience of kind of being thrown into kind of a situation of looking after your daughters, but maybe kind of, I don't know, I don't want to go obviously into anything personal, but perhaps kind of that it wasn't not something that was expected.
Mm-hmm. And although my situation may be different to Rick's, I feel that there's a lot of parallel actually in Rick's situation. So it'd be interesting to hear his thoughts on this as well. But I think I was quite lucky at the time that I had quite a lot of support around me through family and friends. I think that made a world of difference to me. I think if I had been more isolated in that situation, it would have been extremely more challenging for me. It would have been a more difficult situation for me to have been able to navigate if I didn't have such a strong support network around me. Some of the things which are quite different, I suppose, is that my parents had recently left this country to go to the Caribbean, and it's almost as if my children had adoptive grandparents who were really helpful in being able to do things like babysitting and childcare, even at times taking on that nanny function, so that when they were really young, one of them could go there and the other one could go to school, for example, and that made life a lot easier. So because I had that sort of supportive network around me, in some ways, that was a real advantage, and I wasn't left feeling quite isolated. I don't think I perhaps tapped into the formal structures of support that may have been available because I just wasn't really aware of them. They weren't publicized, and that was the case then, which is the best part of sort of 30, 35 years ago, as is the case now. Resources are not put into publicizing the benefits and the opportunities that are available, because people may take advantage of them or want to use them. If anything, the opposite may actually be the truth. So for me, I find that I was in quite a privileged position. I think what I hadn't been prepared for, and in some ways, it was an eye-opener for me, but I'd seen other people go through that situation, but until you're in it, you don't really realize it, is that as a young Black male, quite a few of my contemporaries, their partners found it easier to get employment than they did. So they found themselves actually at home looking after the children while their partners went out to work. I never anticipated that would be my situation. But it kind of was, in a sense, where I then had to not only go to work, but also be responsible for child rearing on a sort of day-to-day basis. So those were some of the things that came to me. I don't know if Adrian or Rick would like to add anything more around that.
Yeah, like I totally echo everything you're saying there. I mean, it was beautifully said. Like same as well. Like when I first had my children, I didn't have a clue how to navigate myself through finding anybody else. And all there was available was mother and baby clubs or mother and baby yoga. And there was nowhere for me to go to feel that I could connect to anybody else. So I would go to these sort of events or these activities that were put on. And there was no other fathers there. I was the only father. And a lot of people would then kind of go, oh, is mommy having a day off or whatever they come out with. And I was thinking, well, where, there must be a father that must come along, no, they're all off working, doing the real jobs and so on. And I was taken back by that. I was taken back by a lot, actually. I tried different avenues to think there must be something. There must be a father club. There is absolutely nothing out there for support. And even though I thought I had a support network, and I had one, I struggled. I really did struggle having my two boys and trying to find them somebody and find myself someone to talk to. That actually, I didn't realize I was going through it at the time, but a social worker came around and I had this massive breakdown. I felt like I was choking because I had no one to offload. I had no one to talk to. I tried all these different avenues and I felt like I wasn't normal. I just felt like I can't do this because I felt more alone as a father than I ever did before as a single man. And I didn't realize I was suffering at the time was post-adoption depression. And I didn't realize that until I went to the doctor. And once again, it is only deemed that a woman or a mother should have some sort of post-depression of having children. And I went through a really awful time. I mean, I'm incredibly lucky that I had the support of social services. But I thought, how am I going to overcome? How can I love these children? How can I? Because I'm constantly being questioned daily about why am I doing that? Should that not be I didn't know. I just felt like I was suffocating, a bit like Cliff, because how can I navigate myself through it if I've got no one else to help me, you know? And this is something that I didn't think about before I went through the process, because I thought I've got friends who have got children, but it's so different. It felt so different because all my friends were girls, and I didn't have a male friend who had a child. They had partners, but I wasn't friends with them. And I tried to kind of get friends, like, oh, you know, I felt like I was being forced into something that I didn't want. It was really uncomfortable. So I went through this post-adoption depression for some time, and I really struggled to love my children, because I felt that they had brought this on, that I had felt all this rejection because they have done this. They wanted me, but actually, did I want them? Because I didn't have that resource or anyone to say, come on, this is the way you need to come, or there's something for you here. Actually, there is something for fathers. You know, it doesn't need to be gay fathers. It could be any fathers. I just wanted someone to say, it's going to be okay. And then when you tell people that you're going through depression, is that not for women? And once again, you felt like you're choked, thinking, how am I ever going to overcome this? And lucky for me, I did. I did overcome it, trying to find people. And before I even worked for New Family Social, someone mentioned this organization, and that's how I got involved. I just saw something and someone said, post on there's this forum, and I was like, right, I'm just going to do it. I'm desperate here. So I posted on a forum and said, hi, my name's Rick. I'm from the West Midlands. I've got 2 boys and I'm desperate to meet somebody else. I kind of threw myself into the fire, not knowing what I was going to be faced. And lucky for me, 2 months later, someone replied and said, oh, we're also from the West Midlands, and they were struggling the same fate. It's like they couldn't find anything that was for them. The only thing that they could find was, like I said, mother and baby yoga, or whatever it was that was out there. Even coffee shops were aimed at, you know, mommy's day out or whatever it was. It was just one of those really hard things to navigate, and it still is a little bit now today.
Rick, sorry to interrupt.
Sorry, yeah.
You're fine. But thank you. I think your openness to share your experiences and struggles, you know, I guess how you kind of facing being a parent in a heteronormative context is you know, you provided such a rich experience, and I hope for others that they can really take that on board. Thanks. in being more inclusive to all parents. Thank you very much. We've come to the end today. There was loads of questions, and we will send some follow-up comms after the event. I'm so sorry that we couldn't get through them all. And yeah, there have been loads of comments, the panel, about to say thank you. And I just wanted to thank you myself, and for a really interesting webinar today, and for your time. And yeah, so coming to the end and closing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been great.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.